Hi, this is the second installment in our series on summative assessments. We're going to talk a little bit about how to write or select the exam questions if you're planning to provide a midterm exam or a final exam. Now I say select because I know you're going to be tempted to go find the test bank that the publishers provide, but I am going to encourage you to think about writing some of your own exam questions because students do know how to find answers to questions that are online. And remember, our main goal in assessment is to differentiate students who know the material from those who are guessing or cheating. So let's take a look at how you can make your test cheat-proof by looking at the way we format questions and the response options. First, looking at multiple choice questions, it's important to realize that you can write question stems that address the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. It all depends on how you word the questions and what kind of response options you provide. So remember this, that you can go all the way up to the evaluating level. Now, since the creating level of Bloom's taxonomy is the very highest level, they're not actually creating anything when they're answering a multiple choice question. But there are some rules of thumb that you should know when you are dealing with multiple choice questions. First, you typically only want to have 4 response options, and they should be pretty concise, no longer than what you see here in the example, that each bulleted item is no longer than 1 line. If it gets to be more than 1 line, it's just too confusing for the students. You obviously have 1 correct option, but you need to know that the distractors, or the other 3 options, have kind of a level of difficulty, something that really separates the wheat from the chaff, and then there should be one that, half the students would get correct, and then there's one that is kind of like an easy out, that they know that's obviously going to be incorrect. Now, that's usually when you have just 1 response, 1 correct response for multiple choice. It is possible to have multiple choice questions where the student can choose more than 1 response. And this would be, for example, if you provide a micro case study. These are good for evaluating and analyzing levels of Bloom's taxonomy, because in the micro case study, you're presenting a scenario, and then with the analyzing questions, you're asking students to compare and contrast. You're asking them to break down what happened in that case study. At the evaluating level, you're asking students to apply criteria to determine whether what happened was appropriate or correct. And so you might have more than 4 response options because, for example, 3 of the 6 might be correct answers. Another rule of thumb is to refrain from all of the above and none of the above response options. That's just pretty much telling the student to pick me. You also want to refrain from true-false questions. I'll come back to true-false questions in a few minutes. Let's scroll down and look at fill-in-the-blank questions. Now, there are some pitfalls to fill in the blank. You clearly know when you're writing an exam question what the answer should be, but sometimes it's not clear to anyone else what the answer should be. So this is a good rule of thumb, is to have your instructional designer always go through and revise and review your fill-in-the-blank questions. You also need to determine if you're going to accept misspellings as correct answers. When we put fill-in-the-blank questions into Blackboard, we actually program it to determine what the correct answer is. So in CJ402, which is the sample class I've been using in this series on summative assessment, if the answer, the correct answer is interrogation, and the student misspells that, would they lose points because of their spelling? So that's something to consider. Another thing to consider with fill in the blank is that there are context clues that lead the students to the answer. Take a moment and read this example question and the 4 corresponding answers. So there's 4 blanks they need to fill in. They would need to spell each of the words correctly. Let me suggest that you change the format, and you also can elevate the Bloom's taxonomy level if you were to instead make this an analogy question. It covers the same course objective, but it's much easier for you to write, and it's much easier to score. So instead of having the paragraph I showed you above, you would set it up to be witness is to interview as suspect is to blank. And the correct answer, of course, would be interrogation. So that's one way to modify the fill in the blank so that it's truly testing the student's knowledge, and it's a lot easier for you to write and for us to put into Blackboard. You might not have thought of using matching questions, because typical matching questions, when we think of as second, third, fourth grade types of exams, it's just a process of elimination. And a lot of times they are assessing the lower order thinking skills. But we can up the game here. We can use a word bank that contains more words than questions. And here's an example. Take a moment to read through this sample test question. So actually there's 3 sample test questions, and you'll notice that there are 5 words in the word bank, and they are labeled A, B, C, D, E. And when the student is going to answer the 3 questions, they fill in the blank with the correct letter that corresponds to the answer they want to choose. The key is in the instructions. Let me go back up here. This is what makes it a good test. We're telling the students that the question or the terms in the word bank might be used once, they might be used more than once, or they might not be used at all. So this is really testing to see if they know their stuff or if they're just guessing. Short answer questions, the student just writes a number of sentences, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sentences to answer the question. These are good for the analyzing and evaluating level of Bloom's taxonomy. And what I would encourage you to do, I said earlier, those true-false questions, I don't like them as true-false questions, but you can convert them to short answer questions by asking students to evaluate or to justify why they said true or false. Then here are some other examples of short answer questions that are testing at the analyzing level of Bloom's taxonomy. When you're asking students to compare, contrast, to break things down, to examine, this is the analyzing level, and so short answer questions are really good for those 300 and 400 level classes. Finally, the essay questions. This means these are true essays, 5 paragraphs, the introduction, 3 supporting evidence paragraphs, and the conclusion. The thing is, you can't spring this on the students the day of the exam. You need to give them at least a week to prepare. And what I would suggest is here, a week before the exam, tell them you're going to respond to 2 essay questions, so be prepared. There are sample prompts provided below, and you can begin formulating your responses. Just because there are 5 sample prompts here, it doesn't mean that's exactly word for word what's going to show up on the test. So you can't just copy and paste your answers. They're just a starting point. What you're going to see on the exam will be slightly different. So we need to give them explicit instructions of what the 5 paragraphs should consist of. And then, of course, you're going to need to write the 5 essay prompts, which when you write your exam, you will simply change those a little bit so that students can't just copy and paste what they've already prepared. Okay, so that's a little bit about selecting or writing exam questions. Next, we're going to go and look at how we complete the deliverable for summative assessments.